I think I'm probably still in shock to an extent. I haven't certainly gone through the entire process of grieving. I spent a lot of time in the last 4 months really focused on the kids and making sure that they're okay and making sure that they're coping with it as best as they can be. And in that, I'm positive that the kids are very strong. They've got a lot of Jo's spirit in them, and they've been surrounded by a lot of love from our family, from our friends, which means that although they have very dark and difficult times, they're actually still who they were before all of this. And we talk about their mum every day.
They're very young still. Do they understand what happened?
The advice from the beginning was to be open about what happened so that they don't find out things from different people. So they know what happened. One of their questions in the earliest days was, why would someone do this? And that's very hard to explain. So I haven't really found a convincing answer for that, and I don't think they have understood why somebody would do it.
There was this huge outpouring of love and support and the big demonstrations at the time. How is it now in terms of, as it were, the wider support for what Jo stood for? It's been
an amazing thing to behold, the level of public support and compassion from people who knew Jo, which you'd expect a bit more, but so many thousands of people, both from the constituency, from around the UK and from around the world, who have been in touch with us just to offer their support and their love. And that matters to me, and I feel that. It matters to me because of the way in which Jo held the country. She always thought the best of our country, and I felt at a moment like this, our country has shown some of its best. And also for the kids, again, one of the big pieces of advice from the beginning was helping them understand that other people are feeling some of the pain that they're feeling. And in this case, that's been so visual, whether it's the thousands of people in Trafalgar Square and around the world as well, whether it's the people who were lining the streets of Batley and Spen when we had the funeral. Coonan said on that day when we were driving down the road, he said, I knew lots of people loved Mummy, but I didn't realise this many people did. And so that, I think, that sense that they're in this with other people and that they are surrounded with other people who are feeling not the same intensity of what they're feeling, I think makes them more confident in showing their own emotions and talking about how they're feeling as well. What
happened to Jo was one of the worst things that has happened in British politics in my lifetime. Can you just talk me through what happened that day from your perspective?
I've spent a lot of the last period really focusing on Jo and her life, and I tried quite hard not to spend a lot of time dwelling on how she died. So other than to say that it was obviously came from nowhere and hit us harder than anything could ever hit you, as I say, I'm trying to focus very hard on her life rather than her death.
Before she died, you and she had many conversations near where we're sitting now about the condition of British politics, and in particular a kind of anger and a coarseness and an aggression coming into British politics, I think probably from the left and from the right. Can you reflect on why you think that has arrived in our politics and what Jo thought about it?
Jo and I thought about this a lot, and we talked about it a lot. We had always been very optimistic people, optimistic in our own lives, optimistic about politics, about the future of our country. And I think in the last couple of years we started to feel that something was going wrong, not just in the UK, but if you look at the rise of Trump in the US, Le Pen in France, AfD in Germany, there's this focus on what divides us rather than what brings us together, which I don't think we've seen in this form really since the 1930s. And that we felt very strongly, but I think Jo also felt it personally. When she, for example, criticised Jeremy Corbyn for his leadership, the torrents of abuse that she got from that, or when she voted a different way from some of the rest of her party on Syria, again, the amount of abuse that she got. Angela Eagle got a similar unbelievable level of abuse for standing against Jeremy Corbyn. And on the other side of things, just in the last week, Gary Lineker, for saying quite generic things about his sympathy with refugees, has been lampooned by sections of the media and had an incredible amount of vitriol. So there's something which is stirring that I think at the moment the political centre is too complacent about.
You said that actually the centre has to strengthen itself and extremism from all sides is encroaching on the centre. How do you think that could possibly be done?
I think part of it is about re-seizing a patriotic narrative. Britain has a long tradition of tolerance, of diversity, of being an outward-looking nation. It's many of the things that made us a great country. But I feel that we've ceded that narrative about patriotism, particularly to the extreme right. And I think we need to regain that narrative, to define Britain in an inclusive way that brings it together rather than blames the migrant or the refugee or the Muslim for what might be going on in our country at any individual time.
I want to start by thanking the wonderful people of Batley and Spen.
I wonder how you felt when you saw her successor as the Batley and Spen MP, Tracy Brabin, actually being barracked as she made her speech by some of the other groups who were there.
The thing I took away from the by-election was that she won 85% of the vote, that all the far-right parties lost their deposit. So that was my takeaway, and the fact that a handful of extremists barracked her on that night, for me, didn't take away from the overriding thing, which was actually the people of Batley and Spen standing together to say that hatred has no place in our community.
Brendan, do you think that Jo's death was in any way connected to the referendum?
So I think the referendum was clearly a moment of heightened tension and heightened debate, and some of that sometimes got out of control. But I think it has nothing to do with the 52% of people that voted for Brexit. Jo was always very clear that this was a completely legitimate choice, and there were good reasons for staying and there were good reasons for going. Her argument came down on the side of staying, but that doesn't mean that she couldn't see the point of view of other people that wanted to leave. I think for me, that what contributed to the atmosphere of Jo's death wasn't just about heightened tensions of the referendum debate. It's something deeper, a deeper malaise in our politics, which is an increasing propensity to blame others for our problems, whether that is migrants or Muslims or Europe. One of the things that Jo always found very frustrating was she was such an affable person, and she had very few people that didn't like her because she was so personable and so engaging on a human level, even if she disagreed with people. And suddenly, from being elected, she had this whole coterie of people who said they hated her because of what she represented in this out-of-touch politician. And she found it very hard to deal with. She had a very thin skin. She took a lot of that very personally. And that's not just about her. There has been a contempt that's been bred, I think, for institutions, politics, and lots of other institutions, but I think particularly politics. And I hope people, I think certainly in the aftermath of this, I think people did take a second to re-examine that. And of course it's fair to criticise politicians where you disagree with them, but to assume bad faith, I think is something we should always try to avoid doing.
Do you believe that, as it were, the kind of centre, the liberal, sort of centrist, metropolitan world has been far too slow to understand the concerns of people in other parts of the community who are having a really, really hard time? I'm thinking of, Labour voters who've had a really, really tough time up in the north and turned to Brexit as a result, and so forth. There's been a disconnect between the so-called metropolitan elite, whether they live on boats or live in houses, and large parts of the rest of the country.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. And I certainly think on issues like immigration there has been a complacency on one side and a willingness to weaponise the issue on the other side. So I think on the right and the sort of populist right of British politics, you've had a willingness, even among people who in no way xenophobic themselves, to use this issue to try and galvanise political support. And I think on the left you've had a willingness to ignore the issue.
More in common was the slogan that she used and you have used around the foundation. Just tell us a little bit about what the foundation is doing now and your hopes for it.
So we're trying to do two things to keep Jo's legacy going forward. The first is setting up the Jo Cox Foundation, and that will help make sure that we spend the money that has come in an unbelievably generous way from the public, I think around £2 million now, that will strengthen the causes that Jo cared about, from Syria to loneliness. In Syria, for example, they're setting up an award for the White Helmets, who are the people that go in the aftermath of these bombs and pull people out of the rubble.
Finally, I want to return to the terrible event, which is why we're talking here. You've said that the one phrase you hate being used about your wife is "rest in peace." Explain that.
Just just that Jo was this unbelievable bundle of energy and of joy and of enthusiasm, and she would never rest in peace when she would live, and she would not want to rest in peace now. And in all the ways we've talked about, taking forward her work, her legacy, fighting for the Britain that she believed in, is our way of remembering her, and in doing so, not letting her rest in peace, but taking her ideas and her beliefs and her love forward.